Welcome everybody, and special thanks to our exhibiting artist, Jack Reilly, for being with us today. I will now turn it over to him to introduce himself and give us a discussion of his work. So thank you very much, Jack.
Okay, yeah, you're quite welcome. I'm still seeing that promo thing on the screen. Is that supposed to go away?
Yeah, give me just a second, sorry.
Okay, there we are. Okay, hello folks. It's me, Jack Reilly. You can call me Jack. And I'm transmitting from Lahaina, Hawaii. I've been a professional artist for many years, since about 1978. And I built my career in Los Angeles, and I currently, like I said, I'm living and working in Hawaii. However, I do almost all of my business out of Los Angeles as I'm represented there. So what I'm going to do is take you down memory lane and show you a PowerPoint that really covers my career from beginning to end. And well, and hopefully it hasn't ended yet, but nonetheless, from beginning until now. And I think you'll find it to be kind of fun and interesting. It's a PowerPoint show, and I'm going to run it, and then I'll stop periodically. And if there's any questions, please go ahead and ask them at that time. But mainly, I guess we're going to wait for the end for a Q&A for this thing. But then I'd love to have questions in the process as well. Okay, so I believe if you type them, I get to see them at the same time I'm doing this. All right. I haven't done a lot of Zoom stuff, but I think we'll go ahead and go. I wish I could see you all, but unfortunately I can't. So I'm working alone here at this point. All right, I'm going to share my screen and begin my presentation. Okay, what you are seeing at this point is, I believe, Jack Reilly Survey of Painting, and we're going to go through down memory lane, as I said. So I became an artist just kind of by accident. I wasn't one of those childhood art geniuses. I didn't have any interest in art really until I hit my teens and my 20s. But what happened was, before it was considered to be art, I was a surfer. I started surfing when I was 14 years old, and I grew up in Florida most of my life. And I opened a surf shop when I was 19 years old. This would be 1969 and 1970 is when I had the shop. So as many of you know, even though many of you are probably from inland who are looking at this video, surfboards are kind of something people like to put designs on and so on. And I started messing around painting on the surfboards. In this case, I was working with resins and creating resin abstract fish. I think you might find interesting later is that some of the techniques I used in my first artworks ever, really carried through off and on to my current works as well. I began airbrushing. The airbrush was a very common element used on surfboards, and it made for nice designs. It painted well on the foam. And so what happened was, I became so interested in art while I was building surfboards. I decided to, there's my friends in my surfboard shop. That was the life that I had. And we also were shown in a museum now as one of the original surfboard makers and figures from the East Coast is where I'm from, as I said. So as I was painting on surfboards, I became really interested in art so much that I went back to college. Now, prior, I started college, but I dropped out. And so I went back to college a couple of years later, and I decided to go to Paris first to study. So I flew to Paris. I sold everything I had, sold my surf shops, and moved to Paris to begin painting, studying art. I was really interested in portraiture, especially at that time, the works of Rembrandt and some of the Baroque artists. And I found it interesting how many of the Baroque artists tended to remove their background from the paintings and really focus on the figure itself. So I thought I'd take it a step further by basically making figures that stood on their own, as opposed to being on a regular canvas. And ultimately, And there you see me in 1972 with my paintings. When I got back from Paris, I went back to college and I finished up this whole thing. I turned it into a performance piece, kind of a kinetic piece. After painting, using my friends for models, I painted each one of them and cut them out and built this whole thing. There was actually motors in it. There was an electric motor in here. This figure was painted on both sides, the figure in the center, and he turned around and would shout and yell at the audience kind of in insulting ways, really just almost an evil laugh as I was mocking the audience. Being in my early 20s, you know, I had that rebellious quality like most people do, and I used my art for social commentary at that time. So there I am at Florida State University and working on another painting. Attending art openings is something that we all tend to do in the art world. It's kind of neat. It comes with a built-in social life. And there I am in an art show with one of my favorite outfits, courtesy of the Goodwill store. At this point, I started painting with airbrush only. You know, I kind of went back to my surfboard techniques, and I started doing these realist paintings using the airbrush. And I did a series that I called the American Leisure Series, in which it really was a representation of middle class and how people believe that, you know, at a certain point, if they have a nice house, a nice car, and all that, they've really made it in life. And I beg to differ with that. There's a lot more to it, but these pictures were basically meant to kind of depict that thing. And there we are together, my painting and I. I evolved and became more interested in the formal aspects of painting as I moved into this series of nudes, in which you can see I have pretty much a hyper-realist nude on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, nothing. But the background is identical. But the difference is that when you place the figure inside of the background, in front of the background, and cast the shadows, it created a three-dimensional space and a visual dichotomy where the surface of the work it's ambiguous as to whether it's flat or whether it has a depth to it. So my ideas of really were starting to develop into a more formal idea of art, developing about visual aspects of paintings as opposed to narrative, which I was doing before. I used the models, the female models at this point, as just simply objects to place in front of traditional objects that would be for art, to be placed in front of the space. And I tried to have them as neutral as I could so there wouldn't be any sexual connotations within the work. Ultimately, I finished this series of work, a series of large-scale paintings. I had my graduate exhibition, my Master of Fine Arts exhibition at Florida State University. And there's a picture of me in there. And there I am with my diploma. Now, if some of you are thinking about perhaps dropping out, don't. Education is the ultimate tool. I just love it. I just think it's the most important thing one can do with their life. And the doors it opened for me are crazy. But during this time when I took this picture, I had just moved to Los Angeles and I was flat broke. I came to LA with $300 and a $200 car, drove across country. I had no money. And I thought, none of this stuff is really doing me any good. You know, I thought, well, I just spent all my time in school and I'm broke and I don't have a job and so on. So I got a job parking cars at the Playboy Mansion in Los Angeles and a number of other places. I worked at the Grammys and the Academy Awards, and I saw a lot of cool people, and it was pretty exciting for me at that point, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I got back in the studio and went to work. And if you just recollect for a second the nude paintings I showed you, I all of a sudden removed the figure from the painting and replaced it with basically colored shapes, colored sticks almost. And I added my shadows into the painting and ended up with these abstract paintings that had a three-dimensional space in them. And it was an ambiguous space, but it was a very believable space because I used the actual cast shadows where I hold objects in front of the painting to create the light for the painting. Things kind of came together for me. I found a new gallery, and by within a year, less than a year of moving to Los Angeles, I had my first one-man solo show here at this Carter Sarkin Gallery. this is a series of from that a group of paintings from that series. Here I am in my studio. Going from parking cars to showing your art really was pretty exciting. And at this point, I became my first exhibition sold out, which means they sold all the paintings. So all of a sudden, I had a bunch of money, and I got some nice reviews. And then I was offered a exhibit. There I am at my first solo exhibition ever, 28 years old. And I was offered to be in this traveling exhibition about abstraction and illusionism that started at the Denver Art Museum and went across country to a number of different museums. And here I'm actually hanging next to one of my idols, Ron Davis, who I was really interested in while I was a student. And before I knew it, I was in the museum. And as a result of that, and some of the ads the galleries were running for me, all of a sudden I was represented by 5 galleries: Los Angeles, San Francisco, Scottsdale, Arizona, Miami, and one in Detroit and New York. And I had exhibitions coming up, and there I am at the Denver Art Museum, and wanted to push farther into the works. And I went into the shape canvas, which really defines an important aspect of my work. This was my first shape canvas, following the same format. But what I did, I removed the background colors from the pieces because I wanted them to feel like blank canvases with projectile works out in front of them, which was pretty much the opposite of traditional pictorial space, in which 3-dimensional space that's painted on a 2-dimensional surface, the artists are always trying to make it look like it's deep. Traditionally it had depth, and there'd be figures and such in it. So this was a response to some of the ideas of the flatness and integrity of the picture plane that was happening at the time with artists such as Frank Stella, Ellsworth Kelly, and the post-painterly abstract artists. I felt a very strong affinity to them, and but I wanted to make a new issue out of the use of space. And at the same time, there was a group of artists in New York working more of an abstract expressionist style, but also playing with pictorial space. And we were called the abstract illusionists. And there was about 7 of us in the country. It was very competitive, but the business was incredible. Everything that I think I did and they did sold immediately. So during this year, this is 1980 now, and I had my 2 one-man shows in 1980, 2 solo exhibitions, got the big ads that they run in the magazines. And when they run these ads, galleries around the country see your work, go, this must be a big deal, so I'm going to invite him to be in my gallery. So at that point, I got to the 5 galleries that I was in and had a series of 5 sellout shows that year, made a lot of money and was working like crazy. This painting was bought by a big collector in Los Angeles. This was bought by comedian Steve Martin, who now has become one of the world's premier art collectors. And there you can see my exhibition. So by definition, these works are considered abstract, they're illusionistic, and abstract, and hence abstract illusionism. I was, if you notice, everything I did was linear at this point. There was no gestural brush marks on the work. So I was antsy to start working more gesturally, and you'll see a progress of the works. Now, I think you understand, if you look at these, the shadows are on the painting painted, and there's shadows on the wall as well. So the paintings themselves became interactive with the wall, creating an entire visual event. And if you're wondering where the painting ends, just follow the interior, I don't know how to say it, the interior line, the exterior of the first things that you see in the center. And the darker shadows happen to be on the wall here in this case. If you have any questions, feel free to ask while we're rolling here. It's another from this series of work. That was from the show I had in New York. This year got so crazy that I made 50 large scale paintings this year. And I'm talking, these are 7-8 foot paintings, anywhere from 6 to 8 feet. And I did 50 of them a year, had a solo show in New York, and things were happening so fast for me. There's the New York exhibition. Things were happening so fast for me that I could hardly keep up with it. And I was finding that I was almost, in a sense, hitting burnout at 30 years old. When you make that many paintings and produce them. I also took a teaching job in Arizona. I was commuting from Los Angeles to Arizona during that period. So I was on the road 2 days a week. I worked in LA on my studio for 3 days a week, and in Yuma for 3 days a week, and then back to Los Angeles for 2 days a week. I did this for a year and a half, and then I quit teaching for a while. Here you can see a detail of the painting. There I am, 29 years old. Feeling pretty good. This painting is a 10-foot painting. What you see in the shapes don't represent anything in terms of a narrative. They're all just geometric, abstract shapes without any hidden meaning in them. It's all really about formalism and visual activity of the painting. And if you're aware of some of the painters I mentioned, Ellsworth Kelly, Frank Stella, to speak of the ones that I'm closest related to, you can see where I played off of their work and moved on. And things would go well as a book I was put into, and amazing. I ended up on the same page with Kate Mondrian and Tom Wesselman, a famous pop artist who also did shape canvases. At this point, I was getting recognition for my shapes, which became really the center of my work. And of course, here I was put into this book against that in a discussion on shape canvas. More works from that period, more detail. And if you look at the interior of the lines, you can see that the gestural surface is really growing in there. The linear part was still there in a gold paint that I used. And some critics actually compared my painting to Byzantine mosaics, of which I love that stuff. And obviously I'm influenced by Byzantine art, Renaissance art, and a lot of historical artworks as well. This was a painting at Marilyn Butler Gallery in Scottsdale, Arizona. This is the first show that I ever had that sold out before they opened the doors at the gallery. It was a crazy time. Okay, that's a good question. I'm going to answer this. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, I'm going to say about that question. My paintings precede the designs on RVs. The designs on recreational vehicles really are an offshoot of art and then graphic design at the time. And it's kind of weird because our art got so much exposure during this period, and all over the country in museums, that I think it had a big influence on these things. And ultimately, people copy things, no doubt about it. I wish I had a residual on every RV that was painted, and some which looked very much like my work. Let me see if I can find that. Okay, moving right along. Thank you for that question, Ivan Grooms. The dimensional series. Well, what happened was I got so burned out with my flat paintings, I decided to start building them in full dimension. So instead of one canvas that had shadows on it, this painting, the shadows are real, the canvases are real, everything is piled out from the wall. The paint is painted on a concoction of acrylic and polyester resin, and then later attached to the painting. So I would do this color abstraction separate from the painting itself. I would build as canvases, and so each painting was built during this period of up to 5 shaped canvases piled on top of each other. There I am in my studio working on them. Here I am shaping the canvas for the painting. I was pretty happy with this series, but my audience wasn't, even though I think I did some really nice work with color and texture and so on. However, as a result of this series of work, the 5 galleries I was with dumped me. We broke up entirely. Being with a gallery is like being married, and it's very strange when all of a sudden this relationship falls apart. They wanted me to do the same thing that I had been doing for all those years, for 2 years, but I did hundreds of paintings. I was burning out, and I just had to expand. And my market dropped off tremendously as a result of this particular work. I mean, I saw all these paintings that you see are sold. They were sold back then, but not at the same frequency that my paintings were earlier. This painting is 5 shaped canvases. It's 8 by 10 feet and has 5 gallons of paint on it, and it's 10 inches deep. You see, I put final touches on one. Verizon bought that. It's kind of neat the way the pictures cast shadows, though. You know, I mean, the elements themselves cast their own shadows. And I finally got with another gallery in Los Angeles and had an exhibition. And you see pieces from that, more detail from the paintings. What's going on the surfaces and within metallics and so on. There's my studio. There the paintings are getting ready to move to a gallery. That was in downtown Los Angeles in 1983 now. This book came out, American Art Now, from a noted art historian. I was featured in that, along with a couple other Los Angeles artists. They're exciting. And here I am at my show. If you've had gallery shows, you know that it's pretty cool, pretty exciting when it's you're the man or you're the woman and you're getting the show and all the people come to see you and pay respect. There's a lot of drinking that goes on, a lot of partying and all kinds of stuff that is happening during these exhibitions. After this exhibition, I threw a huge party at my studio. And I just kind of had an epiphany. I had a realization that there was something missing in my interpersonal relationships because I was painting and working and moving everything so fast. That's all my focus was. And honestly, my personal relationships were going down the drain. So that is then, that since has changed. Excuse me. I'm gonna take a drink of water here. I got so burned out, I rejected everything I was doing, and I started writing music for these paintings, which were a bit of an anomaly of a period of art for me, a 2-year period, in which I removed the decorative elements and I started making words out of the paintings, out of the color areas, over the shaped canvases, and structuring them almost like corporate logos or tombstones, you could say. They really took on a very dark quality to the pieces themselves. And remember, each one of them had a stereo built in it that played music that I wrote. So in this particular piece, on the two far ends on the center canvas, there were stereo speakers in the background, and it just droned out this ambient kind of new age space music. There I am recording in the studio back then, in 1985. Excuse me. This period was a disaster for my career, and virtually none of the work sold. I ultimately ended up putting most of them in a garbage can and cutting them up and throwing them away. But I realized at the end of this period of work that I was going through something very personal. My father had terminal emphysema from smoking and was dying. And during this year, he died. He died the day before my exhibition opened. And I realized later that I was painting basically a eulogy to him to an extent. All right, here's a question. Did shadows play any part in the beginning of what you wanted to create? Or did you prefer to see what the shadows turned out to be after your work was already completed? When I was doing the illusionistic paintings, I would mock up the pieces with, before we had computers, little index cards and cut the pieces out and make little minis. You actually can see one kind of near my head there below me. And yeah, I planned it out. These paintings, most of my work is very planned. I can't say that I'm paint from a real deep emotional place in the works itself. And this was one of the last pieces of that group. Here was my show at the Stella Polaris Gallery in Los Angeles in 1985. When you walked into the room, it just emanated audio from all the paintings at once. So it was like going into like some sort of space age weird thing. And ultimately, I retreated at this point because I had was burned out. Nonetheless, I got publicity, an article in the Los Angeles Magazine. There I am. I had a show of the same works in New York at a gallery in East Village at that time. And I was published in this book called Inside the Los Angeles Artist with the works. Unfortunately, the works didn't necessarily represent what I normally did. So this brings us to the point where you see some of the works that were in the show. So following those pieces, I had a complete reassessment of what it was that I wanted to do. And I started this period called the Classic Series, of which many of them are in the show. This one is called the Wisdom of Dionysus. I traveled to Europe, went on pilgrimages to all the places where you'd see the art, whether it be museums or statues. This statue particularly that I painted from is in the Museum d'Orsay in Paris. Okay. With a question, did the gallery know what work they were getting? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Sometimes I wouldn't show them until I did it. Victory without wings. Again, we have the same multiple piled up shaped canvases, but I started to incorporate all kinds of elements into the works. You can see on the corners, I made partial frames that had that brush stroke, which really became my signature brush stroke. And then the classical series paintings. And I would build these just wacky frames, somewhere between Baroque, classical, Rococo, and outer space craft. I went down to Greece. This is an image from the Palace of Kenosis, and I juxtaposed it against two modern monolith shapes and a few others from Rome. And so I was really kind of a realist painter this time again, and with a lot of structure. And this is my exhibit I had. This is 1987. Got with another gallery. Had this great exhibit, I believe, and it was packed. I mean, it was wall to wall with people in there. They made a movie about it. You can see it if you type in my name, and it's called, what's it called? Art Talk, and Art Talk Jack Reilly. It should come up on YouTube. You can see the movie. It has the people who at the show were doing verbal criticism of the work, whether praise or criticism. And I followed that. I wanted to become more socially aware. So I did a series of works called the Endangered Landscape series, in which I painted these realistic landscapes within a diamond format. I kept the same format, the diamond being something representing something precious, built my big ornate frames, and I actually went to areas near the sites of where the painting would be made from and collected stuff from the ground. You know, you look at a beautiful landscape if you're out hiking, and then you can look down at the ground, you might see a drink can or a bottle or a shotgun shell or who knows what out there. And people would discard stuff. So I gathered stuff up and I came back and I cast it. So the objects that you see on the edge isn't really the object itself of the stuff. It's actually a cast. And I made these casts in with latex rubber. So they were virtually super light. And then I polychromed them with metallic paints. And they were super light rubber. They were just like a Halloween mask, basically, in terms of what the material was. Seen from Yosemite and elements I picked up. The paintings didn't receive a lot of critical acclaim, but you know they did fine. I was again just moving through these different areas as a lot of artists don't do. This is my show in 1991 at Sherry Frumkin Gallery, Los Angeles. And you can see the packed crowd and all the fun, all the admirers and so on. And it's pretty easy to get hung up in your ego during these exhibitions. And you just got to be cool and not get carried away, more pieces. Well, at the same time, I kind of went back and was starting to work on my abstract works again. I had this break from them, but there was still this demand. People would contact me and want those works. And for years, I refused to do them. But I thought, you know what? At this point, it's been a number of years. There's probably a whole new audience now for these paintings. And I embarked upon reinvestigating my abstract illusionism shaped canvases, going back to the abstraction. And I competed for a public artwork for the County of San Diego. I got the award, and it was 4 panels, 10 by 10 feet. Each one weighed 1,000 pounds of steel. It was painted on steel. And there we are installing them in San Diego. There's a movie about this online. It's called Jack Reilly Painting in Progress. You can see it. It shows the whole process of me making these paintings, right, to the installation. And there it is all hung. Now, you know, it may look like everything goes smooth, but when we went to hang the paintings, there was a problem with the engineering of the paintings. So I had engineers help me build these things, and they had to determine how they were going to go into the wall. So they built these brackets that were mounted in the wall, and the painting was supposed to fit the bracket. Well, as it turned out, there was no margin of error. And when you take 1,000-pound painting and it's dangling on a crane, and you try to slip it in to something with maybe a 1/4 inch on each side of it, it's virtually impossible. So we had to take them down before the paintings went up, take all the brackets down. And I asked the guys to, fortunately they had their welders, they cut the thing in the middle and made it so it was a sliding bracket so it would fit better into the painting, which it did. And there was the commission. And it was just crazy again. All of a sudden, there was another huge rush on my paintings of this genre. I became more free with them, more gestural. As you can see in the lines, they're moving more freely. And I pretty much came to my signature color, as I call the way my brush strokes I use. And these are some working during that period. I received another commission from American Airlines to do a piece for the American Airlines building in Los Angeles. And you can see on the floor is the canvas that I was building. That's all in that video, painting for progress. That's the, there it is. There's the completed painting. It's 18 feet by 6 feet, 18 feet by 5.5 feet long. And we took it over there that same afternoon when I finished it and installed it in Los Angeles Airport. More paintings from that series. I was with this new gallery in LA. One of my patrons opened a gallery and wanted me to be with her. So I left the other gallery I was with, and she says, I'm going to make a superstar out of you. Anyway, so and it didn't quite go that well, but you know, we did a lot of stuff. There's the surface detail you can see of the paintings. And ultimately, there I am in the studio thinking about stuff. The paintings all did sell, and they were selling rapidly again. And I was getting that same feeling like, you know, almost like I'm falling backwards again, which ultimately I was, but I don't know, you know, I had a good product here, I believe. And I don't think it's so bad. I went back and did them. Now, you can judge me on that. I don't know. But once again, I was producing art. This is called Duality of Romance. It's 10 feet by 6 feet, 2 canvases adjacent one another. And it was crazy times because, oops, sorry, let me just pick it up again, slideshow. Play from current slide. My art dealer at the time would bring people to my studio, and I give them this very similar this very similar talk about the works, and they were, you know, they're from Beverly Hills, a lot of them. They were art collectors and stuff, and it was just insane. After my talk I would give, all of a sudden I would get swarmed with people wanting to buy the paintings again, and literally putting checks in my pocket. And this afternoon, I made a lot of money, and like close to $50,000 in that 3-hour lecture, a 1-hour lecture I gave, and a bunch of commissions to follow it. So things were getting pretty busy again at the time. And ultimately, we had the show, and the gallery then kind of went out of business more or less, and I stopped painting. I was so burned out. Once again, I stopped painting for 3 years, just plain stopped. I started making movies, writing scripts and making independent films. I really enjoyed it. It was a kind of a labor of love. I made this movie about an artist. And so I was making short films, doing the script, shooting the movies. I made a film about Vincent van Gogh. It's still online. It's called Vincent's Final Moments. You can find that on YouTube as well. Here we are shooting, and there's the film. And I wanted to make a Hollywood style thing, so I made like obviously a dark film here. The actors were all real actors who, worked in LA and worked for cheap. I paid everybody. It was fun, but ultimately it wasn't my thing. You can't make movies on the budget I was on. But living in LA, you get the urge to do stuff like that, and it was a lot of enjoyment. I also did a number of experimental videos that looked nothing like these Hollywoodish style films I was doing, and I entered them and had them in a number of shows and won quite a few awards, and even got them on television. On a couple TV programs on the Independent Film Channel and on the network syndicated show. Then I came back to painting in 1998. I started working on the Convergence Series, which is also part of this exhibit that they're having at the college. And by the way, I forgot to mention in the beginning that I would like to very much thank the SVAL Gallery at Columbia Basin College for having me. I really appreciate that. Here's a detail of the work. It's kind of weird now. The areas in the center here, I would pour that section. And I was really pouring it in reference to the artist of Morris Louis and other of the post-painterly abstraction painters. But this pouring painting has become a phenomenon now. And it's just like, there are so many people out there pouring and stirring their paint with acrylics and stuff. And I don't condone that at all. I don't really even consider that stuff art. I will consider it on my own because it had a context, but in general, just pouring out paint does not really address the issues that you really need to address, because whether it be abstraction or representational painting, there's all kinds of issues to deal with. And it's about a conversation of sorts, a verbal conversation that's done through images that has a historical chain that runs through it. I would do mosaics on these paintings, paint classical statues. There's my studio, 2003. There's another shot of me in the studio and so on, working, 2003. And there's my typical shape canvas that you did see in the other ones. This is the one I built for one of my paintings. This one I called Finding Truth. It's a painting about, in this case, Cupid discovering something. I don't even know what he was discovering on the beach. It's from a shadow. It's from a sculpture. And then I would work with the issues of mixed media, multimedia, mixed media with the texture that I use. This is actually grout that's been gold leafed, silver leafed here, paint. Digitally created words that were put on there, hand painted poster style stuff, generally just canvases that were all juxtaposed to make a giant collage in a sense, but everything is flat. I wasn't interested in illusion at this point, just really more in association of images, historical images, formal images, association of ideas of painting. In this case, association of women treated as sex objects and little elements of such. It's a piece I did. I had to go out to the Channel Islands in California as part of a group exhibition and make a painting about the Channel Islands. So I brought my technique to do those as well. 2008, I came back to abstraction with the Basic Object series. I always had a lot of compliments on my brushwork. And so I decided to really make pieces that focused on the brushwork, on my signature style of brushing, and the kind of the mosaic quality of the brushwork that I do. And I did a series of paintings. This is 6 by 5 by 4.5 or 5 feet. Formal abstract paintings, basically with strong geometric shapes. And then in the interior here, you would have that brushwork that I do using the metallics and the linear format that I'm known for. There's my table. I mix the paint, put it on, shape canvas, ready to go. Working on the canvas would take a few weeks to do one of these. There's it, there it is. It's the same paintings behind me in my office here. You'll see it when I come back on the screen. Detail surface. Again, my stuff is compared to Byzantine mosaics. Here's a few little separate pieces I did. I have an exhibit in Paris with these works here at the Paris American Academy. Ironically, it's the first school I went to when I went to Paris to study art back in 1973. And I was able to keep a relationship with them and return back in 2006 with a group of students from California State University, where I was a professor there and chairman of the art department. And eventually developed a nice relationship with them. As the basic object evolved, I became more interested again in dimensionality of the works, using the same shape, the same brushworks to create these quasi three-dimensional objects. I have to credit a fellow artist really for coming up with stuff first that would look like this. His name is Ron Davis. And he was really one of the artists who preceded abstract illusionism of our time, before it was even called abstract illusionism. And he still works with slabs and geometric shapes. And he is one of my heroes. So these pieces, in a way, were paying a tribute to him, not necessarily meaning to steal from him. But I did ultimately abandon this because I felt there were too many similarities between his shapes and mine. I wanted to go my own way again. However, I handle color and surface in an entirely different method than he does. There you are, working one little piece at a time. We're getting close to the end here as we're moving forward. There's a shot from my studio and my last studio I had in California. Works in a studio. And then these exhibited at the Bleacher Gallery in Los Angeles. And this show I was in conjunction with the Getty Museum. They did a thing, I don't know what you call it, about where they teamed up with galleries from all over Southern California and focused on artists who were active from the 1940s to the 1980s. And I fit into that. And I was selected to be in this show representing me in that period in conjunction with the Getty Museum. Commissioned works. And then a couple of years later, I was offered an exhibit at the California Museum of Art in Thousand Oaks, and it was a retrospective exhibition. This is 2016, not that long ago. You can see the installation, the people looking at the works and so on. The usual story. It's a really nice show they put together. They wrote wonderful critical analysis of the works on the walls next to the pieces, published that, and made a beautiful presentation of the paintings. My usual thing is, you know, when you're the artist, you talk to the people, shoot the breeze with them, and they ask you a lot of questions, and you tell them the answers, your answers. And an artist talk, I gave a similar discussion here to what you're seeing today. This was at the museum. Had a nice turnout for that. And sitting next to me on the right is my old art dealer named Molly Barnes, who recently, basically is the one credited with discovering me in Los Angeles and bringing my work into prominence. She had a pretty hot gallery at the time, back in the early 80s, represent a lot of up and coming young artists. She really liked to focus on the new artists that were happening. And so this show focused on a variety of my paintings from the different periods that I have. So she asked me questions and I answered them and so on. Recently, I did this group of paintings that are also, these are the ones I sent to the Esvelt Gallery for review, and they selected this show. And I went back to painting academic type work, kind of classical academic type work, and combining it in a more formal setting with my signature brushwork, my love of textures and surface, and these simple basic things involved in making art, and then combine them with mythology figures. This is called Eros and the girl, Eros, who is also Cupid. You know, is she pushing him away? He's about to give her the arrow of love. And it's based on a painting by William Bouguereau from late 19th century, an incredible academic painter. And here you can see them on the three-dimensional, on the canvases that I made. Kind of dramatic views when you get to see the side views like this. This one I called Jupiter and Kalisto, and it's based on a Greek mythology about Jupiter transformed himself into a woman and then seduced Kalisto. Ultimately, they had a love child that went out into space and became a constellation in the stars. And, you know, as Greek mythology goes, and this is my modern rendition of that angle view. Again, the surface you see is grout covered with silver leaf and an acrylic gel that I use down the bottom, and that's covered with gold leaf. There I am in the studio to get an idea of scale of these works. Spent 2 years on this series, working almost every day on them. Adam and Eve in Tuscany. The Ecstasy of Saint Sanchez, title based upon the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. An incredible sculpture by Brunelleschi in the Baroque era, which is in Rome. There I am, you know, mopping up. The painting on my lower right here is in an exhibit right now in Honolulu. It's called Madonna of the Rocks. This is called The Last Survivors of the Next Millennium. I thought that would be an interesting title for this piece, based upon the diversity of the ethnic groups of people that they represent, and perhaps this merging, ultimate merging of these two will create the new race as we would imagine it to be futures from now. So the last survivors of the next millennium. Now, what happens to make them last survivors? That's a question I don't have the answer to. And here's a shot of the exhibit I had at the PG Bleacher Gallery. I've been with Bleachers since 2012, Santa Monica. And currently what I'm working on, again, I have sent myself back into abstraction, and I'm doing this series of disc paintings, round paintings, and reinventing some of the stuff that I used before. Obviously, there's my brushwork in action. And I'm airbrush spraying like I did in the first paintings, those first abstract paintings I did with the color fields of abstraction that I had in those paintings. The paintings are rather, I mean, they're very simplified in that regard, but I personally find them quite dynamic with the harder edge geometric thing against the circle and against the soft color fields that I painted. Somewhat based on theory, somewhat based on intuition. My color is usually like that. I've taught color theory for years. I know it inside out. And regardless of formal color theories, there's so many things that can happen when you allow things to take their own life in terms of color. And there's an absolute, complete, infinite amount of colors that exist. I'm working again. You can see me with the spray gun. The colored area in this place is already painted and covered up. And then I brought my signature shadows. I thought, I no longer need to deny certain aspects of my earlier career. I can go forward with that. This is the most recent painting that I have completed, and of which I love this piece personally. And I think the shadows, the ambiguity of the shadows on this piece create almost this nebulous, almost abyss within the center of the colors. So the next few ones I'm going to do are going to be, the colors will all be on the perimeter with the field of color in between. And then I paint a little gold, hard edge gold line separating the two, which acts as a buffer between the two and creates kind of a little bit of a frame for either one. Stretching the shape canvas. I can stretch any kind of canvas, any shape, any time, any place. There it is at an angle. I think that's pretty neat. So I'm scheduled for a show at the Bleecker Gallery in Los Angeles, VG Gallery, Bleecker. That will be in a year from March. So I've got a year or so to work on this series and really perfect it and get the best pieces. That will be showing in Los Angeles at that time. There I am with my spray gun again. Another piece from the series. You can see the canvas. Had to go through a few experimentations on how I was going to build these and how I was going to stretch and make these canvases. And there's a little book about me. It's available as an ebook. And that concludes my thing. Let me now go to stop share, and I'm back on. Okay, so are the moderators there, Rebecca and so on?
Yes, I am here. There was a comment in the chat earlier
Okay.
from Alexa, who said, I think this is in reference to the paintings that played music. And
Yes.
she says, why does the public hate the art you love? It seems to be that way. I think the music concept is brilliant, and I love this series.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad, I'm glad somebody loves it. Think about a motion picture and think of what the motion picture would be without music, without sound. They rely so heavily on a soundtrack for movies. I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking, why can't a soundtrack for a painting enhance the whole ambiance of the painting? But, the art was a funny thing, and they don't like it too much when you deviate too far from what you're supposed to be doing. And also the paintings really lost a lot of the decorative qualities. And there's no doubt that most people buy art for some sort of decoration. Most art ultimately ends up in someone's home, often over the couch or whatever. Some art ends up in corporations. You'll see it in the bank. You'll see some public art. Public art is generally benign. It usually is abstract and doesn't shake people up too much. So I can't really, why they didn't like it, I don't really know. But I know that when I did it, I thought it was the greatest thing. But by the time I was done, I thought, I don't know what the hell I was doing here. Okay, anyway, so let's see. So that's the answer to that question. I hope that answers your question. I don't know. Welcome to those who are here. Welcome. Okay, let's see. The Q&A thing here.
We've got another question from Ivan.
Okay.
It says, just like you brought back the abstract lines with resin on shaped canvases, have you thought about bringing back the resin figures, like Little Johnny, but in a contemporary format?
No. No, not really. I don't see myself going back to painting portraits, and that was hard. It's amazing how much motivation you have when you're 20 years old. The work I put into those was just never ending, and it was extremely, extremely difficult. And at the same time, I was learning how to paint as I was going along. But at this point, I don't intend on doing that. I'm not sure really where things are going to go. I'm going to continue on this circular abstract series, which I'm calling the disc series, and exhibit that. And then I may deviate again on the side and start working with some representational or mixed genre, mixed media paintings as well. We'll see what happens. There's a question here from Andrew Kelly. Have you created any recent surfboards with the different styles of abstract art you have made? A few years ago, I made a surfboard that was completely covered with my stuff, my marks. And it was made for a show that was about surfboard art. And aside from that, no, and I'm not really interested in making surfboards. I still surf. It's one of the reasons I moved to Hawaii. And but I'm not interested in producing that kind of a product anymore. I'm all about the so-called rare object of art. And no more surfboards for me, I don't think. Okay. Anonymous attendee, let's see here. Were you ever worried about your audience response to exploring and trying different things in your work? Is one of the questions from Adeline Valdivia. Yes, I was, but I wasn't worried enough to not allow myself to experience, to explore, and to enjoy some of the things that I really wanted to do. I mean, to me, it's all about following your heart as an artist and following your mind and whatever it is that you want to make. I mean, I am an object maker. I mean, as simple as that, I make stuff and I make paintings. And so I will make what I want to make regardless. I mean, I'm conscious of the fact of how it may be received by others in the world, and I want to be successful and I want to continue to sell art. But when you make a couple hundred paintings in a 2-year period, like I did, that is an experience. I don't think too many people, really do that. And I think it changed me. It really changed me in terms of how I perceived myself working. When your art becomes a factory, when it becomes when your studio becomes like a factory, whether you're making clothes or making shoes or making widgets, whatever it may be, I think you're really starting to lose yourself in it. And my goal is to really try to continue to make unique and personal works of art, even though personally I still approach art from a very formal point of view. Thank you. Anonymous attendee, what was the object creating the art? Did you want to elicit emotion, a connection? What was the main purpose for the other than enjoying the craft you love? Amazing artwork, thank you. Again, the object is, it's like if you have a cat or a dog, they just kind of do things, they got things they want to do. You don't really understand why they want to do it, but they do it. And I believe as an artist, that's really the primal motivation as an artist, is to do things that you feel like doing. Now, of course, if you become an educated artist and you learn art history and you learn the context of where you work, what you're doing, it definitely will have an effect on you, because you're not a primitive anymore, and your work relates to the conversation of whole periods of artworks and whole genres of styles. So yeah, there's intention. There's often intention behind the works that I make, but in general, how do you do your signature? Oh, my signature paint technique. Well, I think it's a different question. Anyhow, I hope I answered that question for you. Josh wants to know, how do you do your signature technique? I'm an awful artist with paint, and my style is beautiful. Thank you. Would like to try something like it, or maybe something for thought. Well, I'm not going to give you too much information on that, but what I will tell you is that, Josh, I could teach you how to paint like an old master within 3 weeks. Absolutely, I can do that. I taught my classes when I was a professor how to do it. It was the first thing I had my beginning painting students do, to learn how to paint classical style works and work like old masters and understand some of the basics before they went on into the abstraction or wherever their art might personally take them. Excuse me for a drink here. Basically, though, regarding my signature style, as we call it, the paint is it's an acrylic-based paint. I buy it in Los Angeles. It's called Nova Color, and it's wonderful stuff. And it has a viscosity that's just about right for what I do. The rest is my own knowledge of color theory and how I work the color. I generally don't thin that paint much, and I don't thicken it too much. And I mix, of course, the acrylic pigments and the metallic pigments in with it as well, which then makes the individual colors. And I lay them on side by side. So rarely they don't blend. In that case, I don't want to blend them. I just kind of plop them on there, and then they build up that, they stick, they kind of dry and set next to each other on that surface, and then create that look. My style in the beginning was really weird at first. But as I went along, you began to love it. I'm not sure which style you're talking about. You have inspired me to draw up a creative canvas. Style is good, and make what I would like, not just what people like. Well, that's good. There are a gazillion artists now making shaped canvases. I mean, I'm amazed. If you go onto Instagram and under the hashtag shaped canvas, you will see zillions of shaped canvas. Now, thank God I mentioned in Wikipedia as a shaped canvas artist and got the jump on them, along with Frank Stella, Ron Davis, Gene Davis, not Gene Davis, the painter, Ellsworth Kelly, and Elizabeth Murray, the very few of us that were making shaped canvases back in the 1970s. So thank goodness for that. But it is everywhere now. You see it. Check it out on Instagram. But you got to do, like you said, you want to make what you would like, and you never know, you might hit it on something that other people like as well. Daisy wants to know, when I took a break for 1995, did I think I'd go back to painting art professionally? What made me go back? Well, at that point, that for me was a big learning curve, because I was learning the computer. I was learning how to do video, learning how to do video editing, learning how to do animation, learning how to do the internet. I had a website in 1996. Very few people can say that. And I was just immersed in this stuff for those 3 years. And then along with making the movies that I made, I felt estranged from the art world to an extent. And I knew at some point I was going to go back, because I was drawn back to it, just as an artist is drawn to making their stuff, and a dog is drawn back to their bone. Anyway, so yeah, I knew I was going to go back. I just wasn't making my living off of making paintings at that time, and I've been a professor for a long time during that period, in which also supplemented the income during the lean times, which I loved, and I love teaching. You might be able to tell from me going on and on here. How did I get inspiration from my art? I always can't find inspiration most of the time. Oh boy, that's study art history. Look at art, look through books, study the history of art. It's fascinating. And there's some just incredible stuff that was made from the prehistoric era through the Renaissance, the Byzantine, and then into the Renaissance, and then into the Baroque, and then into Impressionism and Expressionism, and then into modern and contemporary, and then abstract Expressionism. There's so much stuff out there that is very interesting, and you might gravitate towards something, and then you can spin off of that. You don't necessarily steal ideas, but what you do is take ideas and do something else with them. The amazingly famous pop artist Jasper Johns said, here's what he said about his art: I take something, I do something to it, I do something to it, and I do something to it. Now, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but if you look at his art, you'll understand. Similar with his buddy Rauschenberg, the guys who really busted open abstract expressionism and opened the doors for pop art, which ultimately opened the doors for photorealism of the 1970s, which ultimately opened the doors for illusionism and the works that I and my fellow artists have done. Adeline wants to know, was the eulogy for my father subconsciously done? No, I had no idea what I was painting. I just knew I was, I guess, in a dark period, and my work reflected my fears. And if you ever have a parent and you know they're dying, and they're not even that old at that time, it's a sad deep personal thing. Okay. Someone said, did you see any mysticism in your work? Yeah, I see it. I see it in there. It's especially in the paintings that mix all the stuff up. And in general, though, even as an abstract artist, mysticism is a big part of the work and the decisions you make in trying to figure out what you do. You kind of going on with sometimes without a real clear direction. I mean, look at the paintings of Mark Rothko. There's galleries now that are dedicated to him. They call them chapels, the Rothko Chapel, which is, I think it's in Paris, which I've been in. It's his work is all about mysticism, and you know, you can if you look at what's happening today in the art world, and really and what's happening over time for the past 100 years of art, or especially during American art since the 1950s, the most expensive, the most revered art is the abstract expressionism, and before that impressionism, but the abstract expressionism art, in which there are very little very little clues as to what the artist was doing, with the exception of their energy they put into work, the paint they put into the work. Now, why would art like that? Why do you think art like that would be worth so much more than a photorealist painting by an incredible realist painter working out of New York or whatever, where you can look at a de Kooning that sold for $300 million a few years ago, where the realist painter might make 50,000 on their work, maybe 100, but there's a big difference between 300 million and 300,000. A Rothko comes on the market, it's going to sell, who knows, maybe close to 500 million, gets auctioned up. Why do you think that is? Well, I believe it's because of religion. I believe it's because the majority of people in Western culture grew up in some sort of a context of religion, whether it's a Christian religion or a Jewish religion or a Muslim religion, whichever religion it might be. There's always the thing of the act of the idea of what is God and where is God? And if you believe in God, whether you believe in God or not, you still live in a culture that is primarily a religious culture, throughout the world. But the big question is, you don't really, in general, I don't know people who actually see God, hang out with God, talk to God a lot. I mean, where he talks back. It's all about faith. It's all about belief. It's all about believing in something that is not completely there. And so if you look at abstract paintings of these periods, it's that same motivation, I think, behind the viewer, that mystery, that mystical quality of an abstract work, especially a minimalist abstract work, that makes you almost believe that. And I do think that's one of the reasons that these works seem to have so much mysticism, the abstract paintings, not mine exclusively, but others I'm talking about, including my abstract work, I guess, that people bring their own spiritual values and place them onto the painting. Subsequently, they're worth more to certain people than is a really well done, well rendered painting. Bingo, that's it. I'll answer that question. Ooh, are there any more questions here?
Well, Jack, it looks like you have covered all the questions that we had, and we're just about we're at 5:10 by my clock. So we're just over an hour.
I'm good to end anytime.
Okay.
Well, I'm good to go longer, whatever you prefer.
If there are any more questions, we can take a couple more. Wait a second. Folks are typing. I'm not seeing any pop up. Thank you so much for your thorough responses and for this wonderful presentation. And thank you so much for sharing your work with us. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And it's been fun, spreading my stuff around to your people and whoever else is watching this. So again, thank you to your gallery, the university, the college, and to you folks who are involved in the putting this show together. I greatly appreciate it. And it's a good thing for everybody, I believe. So thanks so much.
Thank you all, also our participants, for being here, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Jack, for coming.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay, it's just us right now. Yeah.
Now, folks are still here, but
Oh,
they're,
okay.
yeah. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording somewhere.